Initially, I planned on doing a video on the scale of my Godzilla video where I watched 2 Japanese Godzilla films and 2 MonsterVerse American films, but I want to get this out of the way before I dive deep into my Age of Extinction video. But first, some housekeeping. I've been watching some videos in the Godzilla/Kaiju community, and I've seen quite a few people talk about a video made by a content creator named Dr. Skipper. That video is really bad, and I understand why the Godzilla fandom was upset with it. However, I began getting comments comparing my video to Dr. Skipper's, which, if you actually watched my video, you'd understand that our videos are nothing alike. Dr. Skipper damn near starts his video with the fact that he doesn't even like Godzilla. I prefaced my video with, "Godzilla never seemed like my cup of tea." This has been conflated with the idea that I don't like Godzilla when, in all honesty, -1 made me borderline obsessed with the kaiju. I've been scouring the web for recommendations, and I've even had the recent desire to purchase a statue of the guy. Dr. Skipper wasn't even bothered to do a single bit of research. He thought Godzilla was in the public domain, which is simply untrue. So what I can only assume was an attempt to find the next Dr. Skipper video, I began getting negative comments. Now, in concept, I don't mind critical comments that actually have some valid criticisms, such as one of the comments on part 1 of the Echo review, where someone explained to me that it would take more than just lowering the frame rate and resolution to really capture that old-timey cinema feel. I had nothing to say because it was a very valid criticism. Criticism is the backbone of improvement, and I'll discuss this even further later in the video. However, what I can't use is TikTok brain rot such as "never let bro cook again" skull emoji. Which, interesting fact, I got this comment almost word for word twice within a week of each other. I'm adding this phrase to my glossary of NPC phrases. These kinds of comments don't tell me anything. I don't know what I said incorrectly. I don't know what I got wrong, and worst of all, none of these people ever convinced me that I was incorrect with anything I said in that video. I approached these comments with the mindset that I was possibly missing something, so I would ask them to elaborate. We'll talk about the responses I got soon enough. There were 2 comments that corrected me on something I said that were valid. One corrected me when I said that the Takao was a battleship when it was actually a heavy cruiser. Fair enough, I was wrong. The other provided an explanation for why the music in 2014 was so bland. Toho did not allow Legendary Pictures to use the Godzilla theme in 2014. Again, fair enough. This provides an explanation for the criticism I had. What puts me in a really bad mood and causes me to get nasty with people in the comments is when I see a comment about how something I said was wrong or bad and they don't explain why. And then when I ask for an elaboration, all they reveal to me is that they either didn't watch the video or they didn't understand the criticism I had in the first place. And before I talk about the Godzilla fandom, I want to also address another problem I'm beginning to see in my comments in general: language policing. I am going to explain this one time. Do not police people's language on this channel, especially my language. If you want to see the ugliest side of me, try and tell me what I can and cannot say. When you try and censor people's speech, it only gets worse with time. It gets to the point where criticism cannot be had because people are not allowed to talk about certain things. I do not want to see this kind of behavior in my comments section. If words and beliefs offend you and you feel the need to tell people how to speak, then this will never be the channel for you. Transitioning back to Godzilla, an example of my openness in the comments was this comment about the reason why white people like Godzilla or whatever. I didn't delete it. I just voiced my disbelief in this being a real opinion and not a troll or a joke. I don't agree with what this person said, but I will never delete a comment. If your comment is disappearing, it's YouTube's doing. And now I have something to say about the Godzilla community. You guys need to breathe. Never have I seen a community be so uptight and upset that people like something from that franchise and that it has piqued the interest of potential new fans. I get that gatekeeping needs to be a thing. I have seen several fandoms, such as Star Wars, fall due to a lack of it. but you need to understand the nuance between someone who is new and is trying to learn in good faith and someone who is clearly here in bad faith or for ulterior motives. This kind of behavior is incredibly unknown to me, and I'm in the Sonic fandom, one of the most fractured and opinionated fan bases out there. Never have I been told that I should have watched all 38 movies in a franchise before I'm allowed to make a video on 4 of them. You want to be a fan of The Young and the Restless and make a review? Go watch all 12,000 episodes first. I don't expect a new Sonic fan to go back and play all 100 plus Sonic games, but if they have a genuine interest, I will give them recommendations on past games they might enjoy. You know, how a normal person treats a potential new fan. I should not have to watch 34 films to analyze 4. If a film can't stand on its own without 70 years of context and history, then it is not a good film. Shin Godzilla, -1, and even one of the films we're going to talk about today don't need half a century of context to thrive as their own films. But I can't even say it's 100% of the Godzilla fandom or the kaiju community. Based on what I've seen, it's mainly one subsection of the fandom, the MonsterVerse fans. And my belief is that this behavior stems from one thing: being rather young. Think of it this way. Godzilla 2014 is a lot of Gen Z's first Godzilla experience. They went on to see Kong Skull Island, King of the Monsters 2019, and Godzilla vs. Kong. They grew up on these movies. A kid that was 10 years old when they saw 2014 is going to be 20 years old now. Many of these people are going to have strong fondness of these movies because of the experience of seeing the kaiju on the big screen. And when you're younger, it can be pretty tough to hear harsh criticism for something you love and you aren't armed with the proper debate tactics and vocabulary to counter these criticisms. But here is a hard pill you are going to have to swallow. That is all subjective. When I have criticisms of these movies, they are objective flaws in the writing, such as inconsistencies and contrivances. It is an objective oversight that Emma Russell would lose her son to the destruction of Titan combat, only to decide that this horrible fate is necessary for billions of people because of climate change. It is inconsistent with what we know about the character. You need to learn the difference between objective versus subjective. I subjectively love Transformers Dark of the Moon, but I am willing to admit the myriad of objectively bad writing moments in that film. You will not convince me that the timing of the Decepticon plan in that film made any sense in the larger picture of the franchise. Now here's the really hard pill you have to swallow. If you love a movie so much, why does some random guy on the internet upset you so much when he has criticisms? Especially when you can't explain why his criticisms are wrong or you don't have any counter arguments because you never understood the point in the first place. Your love of this movie should trump my criticisms and observations if you love it so much. If my little 1-hour video can threaten the love you have for 4 to 6 hours of MonsterVerse films, did you really love those films in the first place? Or are you defending these films due to a bruised ego because someone took a shot at your sacred cow? Your angered response to my criticisms says more about you than it does me. I apologize for front-loading this video with housekeeping like this, but I know the people that need to see this won't watch a bunch of other stuff that they don't agree with to see this part. I want to foster a community of critical thinking, good faith, and respectful people. On my channel, as long as you remember the golden rule, we'll be good. That rule being, treat others the way you want to be treated. If you approach me with respect, I will reciprocate that respect. If you approach me with irate, nonsensical, and disrespectful gibberish that you wouldn't say to me if we were in the same room, expect to see the less pleasant side of me. It's really that simple. Now that that's over, we can finally talk about the last 2 MonsterVerse films, Kong Skull Island and Godzilla vs. Kong. Before we get started, if you'd like to support me and check out a novel from an indie author, hit the link in the description and take a look at my sci-fi military series Blur Havoc. Or if you'd like, check out my Patreon, Subscribestar, or affiliate links. If anything, a like and subscription are enough. It would be much appreciated. So first, we've got Kong Skull Island. And honestly, this movie is probably the best in the MonsterVerse. And no, that's not a backhanded compliment. This movie is actually pretty good. Any problems I have with the movie stem from the later movies trying their best to make this movie look worse in retrospect. This film is pretty good, and that's kind of depressing. More on that later. Hint, look at the title. One of these issues I have is the fact that Skull Island begins with Monarch being on the verge of being shut down. King of the Monsters also has Monarch on the verge of being shut down. You mean to tell me that Monarch just never got their shit together? King of the Monsters makes Monarch look like they've been complete fuck-ups since the 70s. Godzilla vs. Kong does something else that pissed me off and retroactively attacked Skull Island, but we'll get to that later. I want to talk about the thing that surprised me the most with Skull Island. Its theme and commentary. It's a thoroughly expressed theme, and the commentary is well thought out and consistent throughout the runtime. The commentary is that humanity shouldn't insert ourselves into nature when we don't understand the natural order. Oftentimes, humanity tries to control nature and twist it to our will purely out of ego. Look at the interest in weather controlling technology. Little do we know that the order is the way that it is for a reason. The skull crawlers are an invasive species that will wipe out all life on the island, including a tribe of humans. If it wasn't for Kong keeping them in check, they would overrun the island. When Packard tries to kill Kong, he inadvertently awakens the alpha skull crawler, something that probably wouldn't have happened if he simply left the island instead of trying to kill Kong. In a single shot of Skull Island, the film nails its theme with no words. This says more than King of the Monsters ever tried to say in the hundreds of pages of dialogue that 2 people typed up. I actually remember characters, and most characters contribute something important to the plot. Rarely is a character in this film solely to die. I mean, there was that one guy with the suitcase and the other scientist who followed Packard solely because he didn't want to be considered a bitch, but those are the 2 exceptions. The worst character in this movie is probably San Lin, and that's solely because she doesn't really do anything. According to the director Jordan Vogt Roberts, her role was greatly reduced. There wasn't a single character who I was constantly telling to shut up like in King of the Monsters. But Packard is easily the MonsterVerse's best human villain. He starts the movie as a man who feels shame that the US is pulling out of Vietnam, the first war that the US technically lost. When he gets a call asking for an escort into Skull Island, he jumps at the chance to regain some honor. On the island, he watches Kong kill dozens of his men after they disturb the ecosystem with their explosives. At this point, Packard wants to kill Kong to avenge his men, but as the movie goes on, it's clear that this is more about his bruised ego wanting to dominate Kong and place humanity back at the top of the totem pole as the apex predator. He postures his goal as being noble, saying that he and the rest of his men are soldiers and they do the dirty work so their family stays safe. But the reality is that Kong was minding his own business on Skull Island. This is his home. He has no interest in leaving and poses no threat to mankind here. If anything, removing Kong creates more problems than it solves. When it comes to the action, I enjoyed the fights in this movie. Unlike King of the Monsters, where Godzilla's lack of formidability had me pulling my hair out, Kong puts up a good enough fight against the Alpha Skullcrawler while also struggling in some aspects, giving the sense that Kong is dealing with a threat that goes toe-to-toe with him. This is the kind of fight I wanted to see between Godzilla versus Ghidorah. It's not that I wanted Godzilla to completely beat the fuck out of Ghidorah with no challenge, it's that I wanted Godzilla to not be such a bitch-ass pushover. Have them trade blows and equally sustain damage. Having him miss his atomic breath and overall just not bring his A-game soured my perception of this version of Godzilla. But man, oh man, do I have a bit to say about Godzilla in GVK. I also want to save Kong for later, as I have a lot to say about him when we talk about GVK. But in regards to this movie, I'll succinctly put it this way. Kong Skull Island is the movie that 2014 probably should have been. This movie starts with Kong and the humans as enemies who he unambiguously kills with intent for disturbing his territory. As the movie continues, we peel back the layers of Kong and see that he's not just some dumb giant gorilla monster. He has a personality and a sense of duty when it comes to this island and the non-aggressive species that live there. When Kong and Mason first meet, he removes the helicopter that she was trying to move so that the giant ox could be free. Ignoring the fact that this tiny woman thought she could and actually tried to move a whole helicopter by herself, Kong sees this act of selflessness and spares Mason from any potential violent death he could have enacted on her. Later in the film, Kong and Mason share a connection where they realize that they aren't going to try and hurt each other. And in the climax, Kong rushes to save Mason from drowning after he accidentally causes her to fall into the water when he slammed the Skullcrawler into the mountain she's standing on. It's almost exactly what I asked for with 2014.
Instead of Godzilla just being the de facto bad guy in 2014 and his relationship with the humans getting more complicated as time goes on,
while there's some really stupid moments, such as the fact that Conrad knew Chapman was dead but didn't say anything until later, or the fact that the helicopters flew into the megastorm surrounding Skull Island with the fucking doors open, when they could have just kept them closed and opened them after they passed through the storm, I genuinely think this film is a pretty good movie all on its own. But if this movie is so great, why does it depress me? It's because this is proof that the MonsterVerse can do better. My title for the previous video can be wrong, and the title of this current video is correct. We need more Kong Skull Islands and less King of the Monsters. Spoiler alert, we need more of the second half of GVK and less of the first half. Yeah, this video is going to be far more positive than the last one. Before I go on to talk about Godzilla vs. Kong, I just wanted to point out one of my favorite moments in the MonsterVerse with this clip. So now we have to talk about Godzilla vs. Kong, which is more of a mixed bag than Kong Skull Island. There is honestly a lot to like in this film, and I can see why a lot of people love this movie, but it still has a lot of issues. To give you an idea of the extent of these problems, in my notes for this video, I only had 8 bullet points for Kong Skull Island. 3 of them weren't even criticisms, they were things I was praising the film for, and one of them was a criticism of King of the Monsters after Skull Island gave me more context to Monarch's history. However, this is how many criticisms I had for Godzilla vs. Kong. To clarify, only 3 of these points are either positive or neutral. The plot is an absolute mess in this film. Holy shit. I'm just going to list all of the criticisms I had with the plot because while they are issues, they don't completely destroy every character and scene in the movie like King of the Monsters. Bernie is telling people on his podcast with his unaltered voice that he's about to download some company secrets. Why would you do that? You're allowing Apex to prepare for a security breach. Bernie has a really weird personality. He acts neurotic to get the guy out of the room, which allows him to access the computer to download the secrets, which makes sense. But then he continues to act strangely for no reason. People should be able to recognize Bernie's voice on this podcast. Why he hasn't been fired yet is beyond me, especially since someone like him would 100% be in Apex's sights. How did Monarch manage to enter the perpetual storm surrounding Skull Island, which at this point has completely engulfed the island, set up camp, capture King Kong without completely getting wiped out at any step? Why is Gia coming along for the talk with Dr. Lind in the dome on Skull Island? In terms of character writing, I understand why she is here. She needs to express disappointment that they are leaving Skull Island. But from an internal logic standpoint, what reason does she have to be here with these 2 adults who she can't even hear? The MonsterVerse has this awful habit of simply stating that Monarch has captured Titans without explaining how they did it. 2 characters talk about using Kong to help them get to the Hollow Earth, but they then cut to a sleeping Kong on a boat without explaining how they managed to accomplish this. Kong isn't a normal-sized gorilla, he's the size of a skyscraper. There are logistics that need to be explained as to how this was accomplished, because as far as we've seen, Monarch has never been seen in the process of capturing a Titan, only shown to have already done it without any explanation. So Dr. Lind really didn't think about the possibility of Kong not cooperating on the expedition to the Hollow Earth?
Meow, whatever.
You're doing it again, introducing a bunch of characters that could have been consolidated. I'll explain why the evil corpo lady is a problem soon.
Huh?
What the fuck kind of question is this? Only someone who wasn't paying attention to King of the Monsters or fell for the bullshit in that movie would ask this question. Why does Maddie assume she's allowed to drive this van that doesn't belong to either of them? And we're adding more characters with the fat British kid? Stop. The coincidence of the first shop owner Maddie and her fat British friend go to being the correct one that doxed Bernie's address for $10 and a live fish is absolutely fucking insane. I'm just gonna go ahead and say it. The characters in Maddie's storyline feel like Michael Bay characters. Bernie's wife has nothing to do with his campaign against Apex. Why even mention her? That was such a layup and they failed to score somehow. You could have easily made it so that Apex had something to do with Bernie's wife's death. What the fuck? Why would you kill off the natives of Skull Island off screen? What was the purpose behind that? To give the deaf kid Gia a backstory? Kong protected these people and you killed them off to create a backstory for this character? They keep talking about Kong like he's an unstoppable beast, but every time we see him, he's just chained up like he's a regular monkey. Godzilla gets staggered by a regular fighter jet. What even is power scaling at this point? The worst parts of this movie are all in the Maddie subplot. The Kong Hollow Earth plotline is more interesting and has more interesting characters, but the Hollow Earth itself is fucking bizarre. More on that later. Bernie is surprised that the evil robot eye thing he saw in the classified Megacorp basement is gone a day after it was exposed. For a conspiracy theory guy, he isn't that bright. Apex just leaves the elevator that leads to their secret sublevels unguarded and unlocked. That's just ridiculous. Bernie says,
come on, this is page 1 of the Apex Playing God Handbook.
That was a brick thrown through the glass window known as subtlety. Even King of the Monsters was more subtle about its themes than this. I guess you could assume that the theme is about how humanity should not be playing God, maybe, right? The advancement of technology in this universe is comical. What happened to the grounded take on kaiju movies that we started this franchise with? This has decided to become Diet Pacific Rim with the Elon Musk hypertunnel in the Neon City. What happened to this franchise? The insane quantum leap this universe took between movies is never explained. So there's a sun inside the Earth? What is happening? I don't think you understand how severe this is. The implications of a sun inside the Earth are too numerous to list right now. Why is the Hollow Earth depicted as if these characters are entering the fucking quantum realm? Holy Jesus, what is happening with this franchise? The evil lady is literally too stupid to live. She shot at Kong and died. She was only here to be the physical representation of corporate greed and die when she was no longer needed. This movie spends the first half of the runtime establishing lore and world building when none of it makes any fucking sense. The Hollow Earth, Skull Island's natives being wiped out off screen, Apex somehow becoming a mega corporation overnight, Kong just knows how to navigate the Hollow Earth. How did Monarch feed Kong while he was in captivity on Skull Island? Why did the Superstorm eat Skull Island? What happened? There are so many questions about this world. Like an axe with a Godzilla spine is just embedded in the skull of a Godzilla-esque skeleton? What are the implications of this? Were there more Godzillas before this one? Is Godzilla the last of his kind? Who even made this thing? Of course it's never explained. Explaining it would break the world building. Whew, okay, so that was quite a bit, but honestly the critiques I have here pale in comparison to King of the Monsters. Godzilla vs. Kong starts to really shine in the last act. Once Kong and Godzilla fight in Hong Kong, the film stops being extremely painful and starts to become enjoyable. The choreography of the monster fights in this movie is done well, and it doesn't leave me feeling like I want to die. Godzilla is actually a formidable fighter in this movie and somehow steamrolls Kong. He was ferocious and lives up to the title of King of the Monsters in this finale. Where was this Godzilla in the past two films? Godzilla absolutely destroyed Kong while he struggled with the antagonists of his previous two films. This is especially egregious with the male Muto, which was a whole 100 feet shorter than Kong, 75,000 tons lighter than Kong, had less experience in combat than Kong because he was literally born days before the fight, and presumably Kong is smarter than the Muto because he is capable of communication and strategy as established in GVK. Now, I've seen a lot of discussion on power scaling in the MonsterVerse, but we need to take a moment to talk about why power scaling is important. For that, I've invited Mildra onto this video to tell us why it's so important.
Power scaling. The source of many a great nerd fight on both the physical and virtual front. A measuring system that's utterly useless. Until it isn't. Or is that vice versa? Anyway, what power scaling is seems to vary from person to person, as it's more of an idea than anything else. For the purposes of this, let's say that it's a measuring metric between characters. I think a lot of anime fans will conjure up things like the power levels in early DBZ, or the grading system that's used by stands in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. But power scaling can extend beyond that. In reality, it's another arm of making things consistent, both an overall strength between characters, the escalation in a given narrative, as well as making sure that the fiction is internally consistent with its own rules. To that end, let me invoke two examples of doing it wrong, neither of which use power scaling in the sense that people would argue about, but are nevertheless within the same umbrella and contain the same problem, sort of. So Exhibit A, The Long Night in the Game of Thrones TV series, because I am convinced the books will be completed posthumously at this rate. The Night King and the horde of White Walkers was built up as this massive, looming threat for several episodes in the final seasons. Then the inevitable battle comes, and all of that build-up amounts to a fight that's too dark to see much of anything, and the Night King is written off like an afterthought. All in the span of one episode after all of that build-up. Is it shocking? Maybe. But was it worth undermining all that build-up and doing a Gynax ending? Absolutely not. Of course, that's the least of the problems when it came to the tail end of that series, but that has been covered extensively by other people, and beyond the scope of this. Moving on to Exhibit B, let's consider Zod and his followers in Man of Steel, a film that has been my whipping boy for many years, and another notch on the list of reasons why I never want to hear the word deconstruction said ironically by a director or writer ever again. Throughout the film, it's made clear that the effects of yellow sunlight on Kryptonians can be overwhelming in terms of how much they enhance senses that they're not used to dealing with, along with everything else, but I'm getting ahead of myself. And it's mentioned several times that the suits are a way to filter that for a more manageable amount. At least that'd make sense. And then in the third act, Zod is just able to shed his armor and the suit filtering without suffering any ill effects like his followers did. Only given a single line about training his entire life to master his senses, which creates more questions than answers. Again, a shocking move that heightens drama, at the expense of not thinking through the consequences or implications. But what does this have to do with power scaling, you may ask? Well, I'm sure some of you are familiar with Chekhov's gun, the dynamic between setup and payoff. However, I feel the term doesn't answer alone one thing that's equally important: degree. If you give a lot of build-up to something, or make something very important, the payoff has to be equal in scope. At least equal in a way to make the journey not invalidated by a bad destination. Yes, I know a lot of those demotivationals say it's not the destination, it's the journey. That's a load of crap. If you put Hitchcock's bomb under the table and focus on it, it better not be the equivalent of a sparkler firework that you get on a kid's allowance. In the same vein, imagine if the big bad in a multi-hour console-style RPG went down in less than a minute. The reward for the investment wouldn't be satisfying, and even if you can't articulate why, you'll probably come out with a damaged experience. Not necessarily ruined, but damaged. We want to see threats overcome, yes, but it's important that the threats not be built up as main eventers, but in reality are curtain-jerking jobbers, or having your curtain jerker be a main eventer. Stay frosty.
Speaking of Godzilla in this movie, I got a motherfucking bone to pick with you guys. This is the only movie in the franchise that puts Godzilla's hero status into question. When he attacks Apex in Pensacola, Florida, there's this news broadcast that has the header that says, "Godzilla no longer Titan savior." So in universe, he was considered a savior. Dare I say, a hero up until this point. Interesting how many comments I got saying Godzilla is an anti-hero and not a hero in this franchise, when GVK states that he was a savior up until he attacks Pensacola. Even then, spoiler alert kiddos, an anti-hero is still a hero. The hint is in the name. An anti-hero is a character who is a hero but lacks the traditionally heroic traits that your typical hero has. While Godzilla isn't a giant dinosaur who's flying around in a red and blue cape, he is still a being who provides a net good to the world he inhabits. His motive in this movie is not understood until the end, but his goal was an understandable and justifiable objective. Kong, on the other hand, is the strongest written character in the MonsterVerse. He has desires and a personality that shows us where his heart is and what is on his mind. He has people he connects with and cares about. It's not much, but it's pretty crazy that a giant monkey who only has one line out of 2 movies is the best character in the franchise. It's pretty clear that the writers and director were more focused on getting to the climactic battle, so they came up with a lot of nonsense to justify the journey we go through to get there. I know I said I wouldn't bring up any of the Japanese films, but you know what other Godzilla film was very lore heavy in the first half? Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All-Out Attack, or GMK for short. Holy Jesus, that film has very little breaking up the exposition that explains the lore behind the Guardian monsters and what possesses Godzilla. It's not bad per se, but it's definitely an acquired taste. It is not for everyone. But admittedly, the lore of GMK is much better than GVK. Even though it has to do with the spirits of slain soldiers from the Pacific War possessing Godzilla, it is nowhere near as insane as the lore and world building of GVK. So now that I've seen all 4 of the MonsterVerse films that have been released at the time of recording, I'd like to compile my thoughts on the MonsterVerse as a whole. Given where the MonsterVerse started, I'm thoroughly disappointed with where it currently is and where it is heading. You can deny it all you want, but the reality is that the MonsterVerse definitely started with a grounded and more realistic take on the kaiju genre of films. Now we're getting Diet Pacific Rim with the neon lights and hyper technology. I would be able to tolerate this if there was a clear and purposeful transition into this candy-colored funfest tone they're going for, but it almost literally happens in the blink of an eye. One thing I can't fault King of the Monsters for is that it progressed the technology in the universe in an incremental and scalable way. You can see how the technology Monarch has access to became more advanced in a reasonable amount of time, but GVK damn near makes the leap into sci-fi with the FTL tunnels and anti-gravity ships. To be completely honest, the inconsistent tone is reminiscent of the Snyderverse. You'd have ultra edge dark movies like Man of Steel and BVS, then you get into bubblegummy goofball movies like Shazam and Wonder Woman 84, then get movies that are kind of in the middle of the road like the first Wonder Woman, The Flash, and The Suicide Squad. The second one, not the first one. The tone is inconsistent because there's no one at the top with a vision. Each movie is just some standalone adventure that picks and chooses what matters from the previous films. And I don't think what I'm about to say should be all that controversial. The rest of the MonsterVerse should have been like Kong Skull Island. We had monsters fighting monsters, a good human villain, decently written human characters, solid world building, and a main kaiju character that is more than just a roaring monster. It had everything fans of the MonsterVerse are looking for, and it had everything someone like myself is looking for. You can have your cake and eat it too here, guys. It can be done. Now, I've watched a few videos about MonsterVerse from within the community, and there's this concerning dichotomy that I've seen discussed. Many believe that a film can only be in one of 2 camps: turn your brain off silly escapism or dark and serious commentary. But the ridiculous thing is, most of these are not mutually exclusive. You can have escapism and keep it serious. Example, Captain America Civil War. You can have your commentary and keep the silliness. Example, GMK. You can have a film be dark and still keep the escapism. Example, John Wick, the first one at least. You can have your escapism and keep the commentary. Example, Kong Skull Island, a film in the very universe people say needs to be in one camp or the other. It's not about the intent, it's about the execution. You do not have to sacrifice good writing in order to have a fun time at the theater. The only thing you can't do is have a dark and serious movie that is also silly, since they are practically antonyms. To simply submit to the idea that a movie is a turn your brain off kind of film is an unspoken admission that a film requires very very little from you to engage with it. What are you saying about a film and the hard work that goes into it when you basically say a person could be clinically diagnosed as a vegetable and enjoy this movie? And clearly the people who make these movies don't want that to be the case. Each of the MonsterVerse movies have some kind of commentary or message that they want you to take away from them after the movie is over. Even though King of the Monsters' message was utterly fucking confused about what it wanted to say, and 2014's message was very muted, the guys and gals behind the camera clearly had something to say besides big monster punch other big monster. GVK is often considered to be a turn your brain off movie, but let's take a listen to what Bernie said again.
I mean, come on, this is page 1 in the Apex Playing God Handbook.
You can see what the writers were trying to tell us throughout the film. Monarch keeps Kong contained against his will, then hauls him around like he's a regular ass gorilla. Apex tries to harness the energy from Hollow Earth when they have no understanding of it. Mechagodzilla is the epitome of man's hubris while trying to play God. Does this sound like Adam Wingard wanted GVK to be a turn your brain off movie? How much you want to bet the new Empire also has a message like this? And what I find super frustrating is this phenomenon I like to call Schrodinger's tone. Something I see MonsterVerse fans do is that they will claim the tone of the MonsterVerse is whatever is convenient to refute a criticism. Someone claims it's dumb slop, the refute will be that the MonsterVerse has serious commentary. Someone claims that the series started as a grounded kaiju movie. All of a sudden, the MonsterVerse is now silly and mindless entertainment. I don't care which one you believe it is, but what you should really do is be consistent about what you believe the tone of this franchise is supposed to be. I digress. The MonsterVerse is interesting because the 4 movies I watched lined up under the 4 permutations of possible opinions I could have on a film, including the lesser common ones. Godzilla 2014 was a film I didn't necessarily like subjectively, but the plot and character writing objectively wasn't the worst in the world. Kong Skull Island was a film that I enjoyed subjectively and was also objectively written decently. King of the Monsters was objectively an abomination and I subjectively hated every second of it. And Godzilla vs. Kong was objectively a train wreck script while I conversely enjoyed it on a subjective level. That, my friends, is how I separate objectivity from subjectivity. I can enjoy a film subjectively while acknowledging all of its flaws. I can also acknowledge when there really isn't anything wrong with a film's writing, but the film just doesn't hit for me. Oppenheimer is an example of a film that just didn't resonate with me at all, even though it was masterfully done. And as I stated before, Dark of the Moon is heavily flawed, but I fucking love that movie. To give you an example of this type of thinking while also showing you that this isn't some strange made-up thought process, actor Oscar Isaac was asked to rank the 6 original Star Wars films, and this is what he said.
Now here's an interesting one. What's your personal rank of the 6 Star Wars movies?
I mean, there's 2. I have to just go with emotion on it. For me, number 1 is Return of the Jedi. Then Empire Strikes Back, Star Wars, and then 3, 2, 1.
Okay. You put Jedi before Empire and Star Wars.
Yeah.
Is that because you grew up with it and
because it's the first film I ever saw in the movie theater, and I just have a very, that's just, for me, that means my childhood. I recognize that Empire Strikes Back is a better film, but for me, I can't divorce my emotional response to Return of the Jedi. Even the Ewoks, everything about it is, I have a very personal connection to the memories that it elicits.
Now, what you can't do is be upset because the objective flaws in a movie ruin someone's enjoyment of it. I saw a few comments that were confused by why I cared so much about the logistics of the emergency services during Godzilla's San Francisco fight when I criticized King of the Monsters, because that is something that breaks the immersion for me. Inconsistency and accidental retcons annoy the piss out of me because this is supposed to be a connected universe. Why in the world would this inconsistency exist in that case? It's fine if this kind of thing doesn't bother you, but you need to understand that these kinds of mistakes do bother a lot of people. As I like to say in response to the phrase, just let people enjoy things. Let people dislike things. Let people care about what they want to care about. So all in all, what do I have to say to sum up my feelings on the MonsterVerse? It could be better. And I don't mean that as a generic thoughtless criticism. I legitimately believe the MonsterVerse could be better because it has done better. It has glimmering spots where you can see the potential to be on the same level of quality writing as the MCU during its heyday in Phase 3. Kong Skull Island genuinely surprised me with how well it was written, and if you look at the behavior of director Jordan Vogt-Roberts, you can see why. This man appeared in the Honest Trailers video for his own movie and had his own criticisms for his own movie. Seriously, watch the Honest Trailers video for Kong Skull Island. He was way more brutal on this film than I was. But the best part is this.
But it is not, I repeat, not a problem that it has too many helicopters. Wait, what?
Look, everybody thinks that there's some issue where there's more helicopters in the sky than there are in the boat, and then Kong takes down an infinite amount of them. Guess what? You're wrong. There's a shot in the movie where the camera goes around the boat and you see in the back of the boat. And guess what's in the back of the fucking boat? Helicopters. What's inside of the boat? More helicopters. What's the boat fucking made out of? Fucking helicopters. You know why? Because you want to see Kong, like the toy has, grabbing a fucking helicopter. You want to pay $15 not to see him fucking use the helicopter like a fucking baseball bat? The helicopter math makes fucking sense.
Jordan Vogt-Roberts wanted his payoff of Kong grabbing helicopters and hitting them together. So what did he do? He ensured that there was a sufficient amount of helicopters taking off from the boat so that we could have the sequence of Kong destroying them. That's basically your job as a writer and director. Make your payoff make sense. And the fact that he's willing to criticize his own movie, a far cry from this motherfucker.
Looking back, was there any of the criticisms that you read that you may feel is now kind of fair?
No. But
I'm happy to ruin people's childhoods.
How will you ever get any better in your craft if you don't accept criticism? That's why I don't shy away from criticizing something and being criticized. I criticize with merit because I want to see improvement. I want to see you do great things. If I'm not voicing my criticisms, it's because I don't care if you succeed or fail. If you ask me, Jordan Vogt-Roberts probably should have been the visionary behind the MonsterVerse, or at least in some kind of position as lore master or continuity checker. The man is dutiful. And in regards to GVK, it has a myriad of plot issues, but it's clear why so many people love this movie. Even I have a soft spot for the third act of this film because of how evenly matched Godzilla and Kong are. But the reality is that half of these movies so far have terrible writing in them. If we could raise the quality of the writing up to at least Kong Skull Island and keep the fight choreography of GVK, then the MonsterVerse will truly be cooking at that point. But anyways, that's all I've got for today. If you liked this video, check out one of my other videos. Thanks to Mildred for helping out, and check out his channel if you want reviews and discussions on tabletop gaming. And thank you for watching. I will see you next time.